So what will the role be for De'Zhaun Stribling when we kick off the season in Melbourne? All that coming up. So we've got a draft to talk about. We've already had a few weeks now go by since the draft. We've got guys going on different shows talking about joining the Niners, and I'm talking about Kyle Van Noy. So it'd be really nice to see if we can add another pass rusher for sure. But more than anything, this was really nice to kind of finally get to decompress a little bit from the draft and really look at it for what it was. And again, we've had so much criticism, and I think that a lot of it is probably just due to the fact that the 49ers are so unorthodox in what they do. 49ers go against consensus by such a large margin that I think that a lot of folks are uncomfortable with that. I mean, they make folks uncomfortable, even folks that cover the team or cover the team very closely, the local beat reporters, but also obviously content creators as well. And again, keeping in mind too that a lot of these folks are also 49ers fans as well. And I think all of us that are diehard 49ers fans know if you don't win the whole thing, and I want to talk about that real quick before we get to Stribling, because I want to get to Strib and definitely want to start the Strib to the crib chatter, because it's just something that I think is going to happen with this guy. He's going to be a great player, and he's going to get to the house a lot this upcoming season. But before we get to that and all the other picks, I do want to talk about this idea that the 49ers are a team that they're so unorthodox, and yet they're a team that keeps winning. And I think that that's kind of something that, of course, health has come into play a lot in 2020 and obviously in 2024. So I do find it really interesting, this idea that the 49ers are so bad at drafting, that there's so much hubris there. And look, I'm a big believer that you can be very confident and not be arrogant. And I think the 49ers straddle that line, of course, with Kyle and John. They're really confident guys. I don't know how much of it I would say, okay, this is just straight up arrogance versus this is something where they are just really confident in their process and they're confident in what they do. I think that there's a mix between being really confident and then also believing too much in your confidence and in your process. But I think that one thing that the 49ers do, although they go against consensus a ton, the 49ers also do a pretty good job of bringing guys in that fit their system and fit their culture. I think that if you go back to 2019, yeah, Bosa was a slam dunk pick. I get that. We needed a pass rusher. He was a slam dunk guy at second overall in the draft in 2019. But he was a culture fit. You know, he was a guy that he was going to come in, he was going to come work. He was willing, very willing to play the run as well as the pass. And I think that that's something that's always been somewhat of an underrated part of his game, because he's such a physical specimen that gets after it and pressures the quarterback. But I think in a previous generation, he would also be really noted for being a guy that plays the run really well. And I think coming out of college, that was something that he was known for. And the 49ers being tough, being gritty, playing the run. And then the second pick in that draft was Debo in the second round. And again, man, I'm getting a little foggy because of all these drafts and all these picks. I don't think there was any other pick in the first round that year. It was Bosa, and then the second guy was Debo, taken in early on in the second round. And Debo was a guy that, again, you didn't know where he was going to play or how he was going to be most effective, other than the fact that he was a wide receiver. But he was a guy that popped in the Senior Bowl. And I want to connect the dots between that and the fact that he popped in the Senior Bowl and this year's draft and the guys that popped around the Senior Bowl time for the 49ers. Because who Debo was in that Senior Bowl and leading up to that draft was a tough, gritty guy that was explosive, that was dynamic. And remember, that's who he was at that moment, before all the injuries, before all the mileage in the NFL. We have to remember this guy was a really good, speedy guy, and especially in a short area, and still has some of those elements to his game. So that's who the 49ers saw at that point in time. And I do think that Kyle saw what he could do with him as a receiver as well as a running back, and the versatility. And this year's draft, again, connecting from what Debo did in that Senior Bowl to what the 49ers saw from different guys at the Senior Bowl this year. I mean, Grayson Halton, that guy to me, after Stribling, to me, Halton, and even before Stribling, Halton might be the best pick that they got in this entire draft, because when I watched the Senior Bowl this year, he stood out to me. There were certain dudes that just stood out. You know, there were dudes that in the one-on-one drills that they were men amongst boys, as we always say, right? Zion Young, TJ Parker, they were dominating their drills. So it doesn't mean that they're going to be amazing NFL players, but it kind of shows you this is who this guy is. This is what he can do. This is sort of their physicality, but also their burst. These are some of the things they can do against other guys that will get drafted, most of them at least, that will also get drafted at some point. And so for me, that was something that stood out to me, was Grayson Halton, who was not the biggest guy, who was not the most physical in terms of just his own body, but who was playing extremely physically and who was playing with a lot of push and burst and explosiveness. And to me, that stood out. So when we picked him, I was like, wow, this is a guy right here at this point in the draft. That's a huge value for the 49ers. And you remember, and this is another thing that doesn't get talked about, and I want to talk about it real quick, is that I really believe that when we're evaluating these drafts and we're evaluating how well the 49ers do or don't do, and we'll get back to consensus and what all that means. And I know we've already kind of done a deep dive sort of, what that means to them versus what that means to the versus what that means to the rest of the league and whatnot. But to me, the thing that is really interesting is that whenever we have these conversations about, where the 49ers are picking guys, there's never this thought of, well, what about the trades that they made? What about the guys that they traded, the picks that they traded away to get certain guys? To me, that should be included in the draft chatter. In 2020, you traded, I can't remember which picks. It was maybe a fifth rounder, and I can't remember what else, but you made a trade for Trent Williams. And Trent Williams is way more of a value than those picks ever turned out to be. I know that. I don't have to look it up. So Trent Williams that year, and I get it, Washington wanted to part ways. He wanted to leave as well. So that all plays into it. But I think that needs to play into the critique, or I should say that the analysis of how well John and Kyle do. Again, not excusing any of the missteps along the way, and there have been plenty for sure, but there's plenty with everybody. And so, but again, I do want to just point that out, that I find it really interesting that when we're covering these guys, I want to cover the entire picture. I don't want to just look at picks, from the 1st to the 7th round. And some of those years, we didn't even have a 1st round pick because of the Trey Lance trade, for example, right? Which again was a misstep, huge misstep. But what did they do when they traded picks away for established guys? So Trent Williams is one. The other big one was CMC. Now you gave up a lot for CMC. I think it was, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, even, and then a future 5th to get CMC. But you have to look at what happened with those picks, and did they turn into any player that's anywhere remotely close to what CMC gives you, even with the health stuff coming up, right? I would say you could put all those picks together that they traded to Carolina, and probably you won't find, in fact, I don't even want to say probably, you will not find nearly the value that an all-pro, Pro Bowl guy and a future Hall of Famer is giving you and still giving you right now. So those are just some of the things I wanted to point out. And then fast forward to this year, the Oso Odighizuwa, everybody loved that trade. That was a 3rd round pick. And so that to me needs to get factored into this whole thing. It does. I really believe that, because even though he wasn't a drafted player out of college, he's an established pro. You gave up a 3rd round pick to get him. So another team is basically saying, in this case, the Cowboys, we'll take some young guy out of college in the 3rd round, and we'll be able to replace the amount of value. They're not really saying that, but that's kind of what the value is when you're making that trade. They think that he's worth a 3rd round pick, a 3rd round talent. And I think the 49ers, again, it's been universally approved and lauded that they went out and got Oso Odighizuwa, who really will help this defensive line a lot. Gets pressure, one of the highest pressure rates last year in the NFL at pressuring the quarterback, and a guy that just plays the pass really well, but also plays the run pretty well too. It's not like he's incapable of stopping the run. In fact, I thought he did a pretty good job overall, and a really good job in certain short yardage and goal line stuff when he was in there. So that's what I'm saying. I think that this whole thing needs to be looked at from that lens. Now, again, looking at, things like the Senior Bowl, things like the Shrine Bowl, and all these different things. I think the 49ers, maybe more than some other teams, especially the top 10 teams, they really value how these guys do at that time. And they really value certain traits that fit their culture, fit their scheme. And I think everybody is trying to find a guy that fits their culture and their scheme. I think the 49ers go really hard at that. You watch all these clips of De'Zhaun Stribling, and he's putting guys on their backside when he's blocking, and he's just taunting. I mean, to be honest, he's a good guy, but you could see in the game, he's got a lot of George in him. He's got a little bit of Debo. Not that Debo was this amazing blocker, but he always put, when he wanted to, he could put great effort into it. Ayuk was actually a great blocker. So this whole idea of having a receiver that can block at that level and just be confident enough to do it and be willing enough to sacrifice his body. Jawan is another guy, and just continue to push and drive. I think that he pops off the film immediately when he does that. Then you see what he does with the ball in his hands, and he runs away from people like it's easy. I haven't seen a guy almost glide to the end zone like this since Raheem Mostert. I mean, honestly, Raheem would hit top speed, when we had him in 2019 and just a little bit thereafter as well, but especially that season, he would hit top speed and it looked like he was just gliding. The dude didn't look like he was straining at all to get to that speed. And when I see De'Zhaun Stribling just run away from dudes, especially in that Georgia game and some of those other plays that he made, where he's just catching the ball, turning, and he's burning all the way to the end zone, except it doesn't look like he's putting out that effort to get to 4.36 speed. And he has legit 4.36 speed with shoulder pads on, right? And that is also rare. I think the 49ers saw that. I think they saw a guy that is a willing blocker. He fits the culture. They saw a guy that can run away from people, so he's going to enhance what you already do. 6'2 plus, 207. And a guy, again, he's coming in as a rookie, right? So he's going to evolve. He's going to grow. He's going to mature. And we'll see. I think this year, I like to kind of just joke around saying strip to the crib, but it's because I see this guy being a guy that can be this great weapon for the 49ers, whether he's used in certain packages. And that's the other thing. His blocking ability will allow him to be on the field a lot more. His blocking ability will allow Kyle to create certain packages. I mean, at Ole Miss, sometimes they lined him up as a fullback. They lined him up in the backfield because he was such a good blocker. He wasn't just blocking these small DBs. This guy was blocking these outside linebacker hybrid types that are 20, 30 pounds bigger than he was, and yet he was still doing a really good job. So that's another thing you look for. George is 250 pounds and he's going up against these behemoths, sometimes defensive ends and even, D tackles or whoever's coming. And George is still holding up like an offensive lineman. And so when you see a guy like De'Zhaun Stribling blocking the way he does against dudes that are his size, but also dudes that are bigger, it's incredibly impressive. And so I just see that. I see a guy that is going to be a factor right away. I don't think he's going to have the same learning curve as Ayuk had. I think he's going to splash onto the scene a little bit more. You could play him in the slot at times. I mean, look, Christian Kirk was signed to be your slot guy, or I should say, not De'Zhaun in the slot, although he could play some slot too. You could play Ricky in the slot and De'Zhaun outside. Now you have three receivers with Mike Evans, Pearsall, and Stribling as just great weapons, really good weapons to go to in the red zone. You could see, and again, because of the blocking ability of those guys, and again, Ricky's not a bad blocker either, but because of the ability those guys have to threaten the pass, that's going to open things up in the run game in a way that we didn't see last year. Part of the reason why CMC was averaging, 3.5 yards a carry, somewhere around there, was because there wasn't a huge threat. There wasn't a number one or number two receiver, right? And that's the thing. That's no knock on Jawan. Jawan was incredible for what he was doing here. But Mike Evans, he is not, right? Ricky at his best and healthy, he's not. And I believe this kid, Stribling, is going to be another amazing weapon to add to the arsenal for the 49ers. So those guys I think are going to be great. I think the last thing I just want to say and wrap up on real quick, because I'm just going long because this is a lot of fun to talk about. Lots been made about the final roster, and we'll get to that. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. I did want to say though that of the receiving group, the guys that are on the bubble, I do think it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be your punt returner, that kind of stuff, because really that's a job that's still open. And I don't think they're going to use Ricky for that, although he could do it. I think that the health stuff and also how they view Ricky, they view him as a guy that they can go to on first, second down. They're not going to put him in special teams to do that. I think Cowing is a guy that really needs to earn his spot doing that, being in that role. And then, I do think that of some guys that are on the bubble. I mean, obviously Demarcus Robinson's a guy that's on the bubble. I'm really interested to see how this tight end group comes together. I know obviously Luke Farrell is there, and obviously Tunges is going to be the starter until George is back. But Braden Willis is a guy that I went back and took a look to see what else is this guy bringing to the table that maybe I haven't seen the last couple of years in a Niners uniform. So I think that he needs to continue to get back to who he was, coming out of college. And that was a guy that was a little more explosive. And that was a guy that could be a great blocker. I think that is something he needs to continue to do. I think that he has a role. If, again, you don't know, guys will go down. Maybe Farrell goes down, all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, you're elevated a little bit more and right behind Tunges. And so, again, like I've said before, guys are going to get on the field because of their physicality and their blocking ability and their ability to just be on their assignments. And special teams, obviously, is a big one. Last guy I want to talk about real quick is Kalen Black. Kalen Black, Jordan James, that's going to be fascinating to watch during training camp, just to see very different style runners, very different. I think, to me, Jordan James reminds me a little bit more of like a Fred Taylor, for those that remember old Jacksonville Jaguars back in the 90s, that kind of running back, where really smart, waits for things to develop. And Kalen can do that too, but Kalen's a really physical runner, and he's got more burst. He's got that burst and that physicality that makes you think in short yardage and in goal line. I think he has an advantage there on Jordan. Jordan James isn't going to be a guy that you can really use that much there because he's not as big and physical as Kalen. So that's going to be fascinating to watch. We've got so much going on. Obviously, the BA stuff still needs to get solved, but that's really on the back burner right now with the way that everything's progressed with this roster. And do they have one more big move up their sleeve? It'll be interesting to see. Is it Kyle Van Noy? Maybe. I know the 49ers have, over $60 million in cap space. How much of that are they going to use? How much of that are they going to roll over to next year? But that'll be interesting to look to see. Joey Bosa's still out there. How much money is he going to cost? And, is Mama Bosa going to approve of all that? So we'll take a look at that. Kyle Van Noy, we're going to be looking at all of that coming up in the future episodes. Thanks so much, you guys. Be sure to like and subscribe, and talk to you soon, faithful. So